This is TLV1.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern.
And I'm Yael Barda.
Every week we bring you
The
conversations with
Tel Aviv
authors
Review.
about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we cannot thank you enough. This interview is being recorded on the sidelines of a conference at Brandeis University's Schusterman Center for Israel Studies titled Democracy and Its Alternatives, The Origins of Israel's Current Crisis. Our guest, a fellow at the Schusterman Center's Institute for Advanced Israel Studies, is speaking at the conference that is organized this year together with the Center for Jewish History in New York. Ahmad Agbaria is a teaching fellow at the Department of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, specializing in the modern history of the Middle East and specifically Israel-Palestine. Dr. Ahmad Agbaria, hello. Hi. And welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you for having me.
During this current crisis, one of the things that is not talked about enough is the erosion of the citizenship of Palestinian citizens of Israel. And that erosion doesn't begin today or even 2 decades ago, but actually with the inception of the state. And so your work on kind of the transition from empire to nation states and the social order that brings is an interesting lens to think about what happens to Palestinians who become citizens of Israel very early on within that new social order.
Right. Yeah, so starting in 1948, when Israel was established as an independent state of the Jewish people, Palestinian citizens were marginalized and almost excluded from the building of the state itself. The worst thing that happened to the Palestinians is that they all of a sudden they lost their subjectivity, in the sense that they were instantly the invisibles of the new state. For 16 long years, they were placed under military government until 1966, just before 6 months before the outbreak of the 1967 war, right? And then coming out of the military rule or military government, they were somehow integrated in the state, but in very few sectors. Now they were allowed free movement in Israel. More people were able to get to Israeli universities, even though Israeli universities did not open their gates for Palestinian citizens that much. This is going to happen only in the late 80s and in the early 90s. And they reached their golden age for a brief time in 1990s under the time of Oslo, when the world was very optimistic. For a moment, the world was very optimistic. All the if you look around in the United States, was elected a young president, and South Africa ended its apartheid regime. In Germany, the Berlin Wall was knocked down. Israel recognized the Palestinian Authority as a legitimate authority, right? And in that time, Palestinian citizens also felt that they are being more accepted and legitimized in Israel. However, as you said in your question, things began to deteriorate a little bit after in the late 90s, and especially after the outbreak of the second Intifada that started in 2001. And that has been going on, this process for almost 2 decades. And this reached 2018 with the national law, in which Israel was made or seen as a state only for the Jews.
Just to periodize this, you have this the period of the military government that goes from 1949 to 1966, with people that are really governed under a military rule that prevents freedom of movement. That is, the military is in charge of licensing businesses. Any kind of interaction with the state is one that is laden with fear. And then you have this kind of transition period from 67 until the 90s, in which there is some sort of integration. And then the golden 90s. And I think it's important to remember that the citizens, Palestinian citizens of Israel, were definitely told to sit on the sidelines of the Oslo Accord. And this is a very important part of the story, because they don't, there is a hope, but they don't have a voice in the process. And then, of course, coming to the Second Intifada, with the killing of the 13 protesters, Palestinian citizens of Israel, marks this kind of era of the erosion of citizenship that, like you said, kind of reaches a peak with the nation-state law. And so now we're close to 5 years after the nation-state law. What would you call this period? What would you call this moment, these 5 years between the nation-state law and what's happening right now, in terms of the status of Palestinian citizens of Israel and the type of trajectory that we can expect? It's kind of a speculative question.
Yeah. I don't have a name for this period, but since during that time period, I lived in the United States most of the time. But I follow the news, and I talk to my family and friends in Israel. It's perhaps the worst period that they have ever experienced since the end of the military rule in 1966, December 1966. Now, what I can say it's not as worse as 1966. Remember.
But in what terms? The relationship with the Jewish majority and the state? In
the sense that, to be a minority in Israel becomes almost unbearable, in the sense that you start to feel, as a Palestinian citizen, as small in the world of giants. It's hard to explain to somebody who is part of the majority the meaning of being small or feeling small. Basically, after the passage of the national law in Israel, it becomes legitimate to be overlooked and unseen in society, right? And this is the time in which Palestinian citizens start to feel that they are parasites in their own land, right? And this is this actually brought all the memory of the military rule. And many Israelis don't know that during the military rule, until 1975, nearly 19,000 Palestinian citizens left the state because of their circumstances, because Israel made it hard for them to get into universities, because of employment, because of even it was really hard for Israeli citizens, Palestinian citizens, to get a driving license, right?
Where did they go?
They went mostly to neighboring Arab states. Think about the case in September 1961. 5 Palestinian citizens, all of them high school students. They left Israel and went to Gaza. They wanted to cross the borders with Gaza in order to go to Egypt, to live in Egypt. They did not tell their families about their attempt to leave the state of Israel, right? And they left in the middle of night the Magav, Israeli border.
Police.
They met them and they killed them. And the next morning, the Israeli police delivered the bodies of the 5 boys, one from al-Fahim, one from Sakhnin, and 3 from Haifa. All of them are Christians, right? And the next, as the police delivered the bodies of these 5 young people, right, their bodies were mutilated, and their faces were just deformed in such a way. And Ha'olam Hazeh, Israeli weekly that was published at the time, put their pictures, and for the first time, Palestinian citizens took the streets and started to demonstrate, and it was the first time that they could push back against the military rule. What happened today is just brings back all these stories from the 50s and the 1960s, in which Palestinians don't feel confident enough to go to places like Khidera, close to where Arab lives, right, or even Afula, right. I know that my parents, they don't mind. They are old people. They go and visit Jewish cities, whereas my younger sister, she's very careful. She avoids traveling to Tel Aviv or other cities. So the situation today is very precarious for Palestinian citizens of Israel.
That is because of the social tensions. I wonder to what extent that also is displayed in their relationship with the state and with the state authorities, in the sense of how confident they feel in appealing to them, to what extent they think that, I don't know, the police might protect them, or the courts might give them some sort of answers to their pleas.
Yeah, you have to differentiate between 2 things. The Palestinian citizens, they don't trust the police that much, whereas when it comes to the Israeli court system, I would say they trust it more. The integrity of the court system in Israel is clearly resonates with Palestinian citizens.
But do you think it's also been affected in recent years? Has it gone down in a significant way?
Yeah, it the same ways that it affected the majority of Israeli Jews in this sense, right? Because many people start to lose faith in the entire system, and many people start to even call, among the Israeli majority, right? They are calling to try to change or unmake the social order that was created since 1948 with figures like Ben Gurion, all the founding fathers, and Moshe Dayan and Moshe Sharet and others.
I have another question. This is also to you, Yael, as someone who's, as a sociologist, who's studying like patterns of especially colonial and post-colonial patterns within the Israeli polity. What you said earlier, Ahmed, about a long view history of the Palestinian citizens of Israel. It's really interesting how intertwined it is with the history of Israel's relationship with the Palestinians, not the Israeli ones, so the Palestinians in the territories. The military rule came right after the 1948 war. I mean, you said that there was a golden age in the 90s, just when Israel seemed to normalize its relationship with the PLO and the Palestinians. And, the killing of the 13 demonstrators in 2000, when everything seemed to be going up in flames, and has been on a downhill spiral ever since, with the nation-state bill that really heralded this moment of the Israeli political landscape going off the deep end rightwards. And the fact that it's so intertwined with the Palestinians, in a way, undercuts the colonial logic of separation, right? That you would think that to accept reading the history of Israel's relationship with its Palestinian citizens through that lens, would say that Israel will do everything to separate the trajectory of its own Palestinian citizens from its relationship with. And it seemed like, I don't know, there were forces that were greater than that logic. And I wonder what you two, Yael and Ahmed, have to say about that.
So first of all, I think that what's also intertwined is the history of Palestinian citizens of Israel, of their citizenship and their struggle for recognition and for equality and for democracy, is also Israel's liberal struggle. And this is something that people don't understand as deeply as possibly we should, is basically Israel's liberal history is, for most of it, also the struggle of Palestinians to become, if not completely equal citizens, basically the living proof of Israel's liberalism. And there's this constant fight that takes place. At the beginning, there's still room in the Knesset for that debate. And in the early years of the country, you can look at state protocols in which there's discussions about Palestinian citizens of Israel, about the military government. Begin in 1962 is a very strong advocate against the military government. It's kind of his proof that Ben Gurion is not a Democrat. Is actually so. I mean, it's really interesting how that history is also the history of the battle for democracy and for hegemony, for Jewish hegemony as well. What I think happens in the recent years, where you really have a decline in any kind of political imagination of solving the conflict, and the deterioration of what's happening in West Bank and Gaza. And at the same time, you have a rise of middle-class Palestinian citizens of Israel that are becoming more and more integrated in society. And that is very scary to the right wing. And I don't think that the extremism that we're seeing now is such a surprise, given that Palestinian citizens of Israel were part of the last coalition. And there's this is a fight and a backlash about the possibility for integration and the possibility for equal citizenship. However, there are different sides to this. And I'm going to try and be very parsimonious here. On the one hand, understanding that Palestinian citizens of Israel are part of the Palestinian people. And on the other hand, not fearing that fact is basically the way to democracy in Israel. Understanding those both things. But I think extremists on all sides try and prevent the possibility of those two phenomenon living together, of having a possibility of kind of this dual loyalty.
No, it's also interesting. I would like to hear your, Ahmed's view on this. To what extent for the Palestinian citizens of Israel, really their struggle for integration into the broader Israeli liberal society, as Yael says, is separate from their belonging to the Palestinian nation? And to what extent these two struggles that obviously they care a lot about are intertwined or separate?
Right. This is you can't answer this question except if you divide the history, the 75 years history, into three periods. Right. The first period in Israel, between 1948 until 1967, you could say that Israeli Arabs, right? They only wanted to live, to be recognized, right? No more than that. After that period, you have among the younger generation developed an ambition to be integrated into Israeli society, right? Whereas after the 1990s, right, you have a new wave of what we call Palestinization, or the ambition to assert their own identity, and they don't like the fact that Israel tries to somehow resist this natural desire for the Palestinians to assert their own identity. They are asserting their identity because if you say that you are Palestinian, in a sense, you feel that you belong to the land. In a sense, you don't want to see yourself as a second-class citizen, right? Because the concept now is that this land is shared by all, not only by the Zionist movement, and how you can claim roots by actually claiming the identity of the land, by saying that I belong, I am Palestinian, so I belong, right? And this way they actually undermine claims by Ben-Gvirs and Smotriches and other people who try to tell Palestinian citizens that they are exterior, or somehow, they arrived here only in the 19th century or something like that, right? But that you have to go back in history and ask yourself what happened in 1948. All Israel is part of the Middle East is not different than the time period in which it emerged, right? After World War II, most of the post-colonial societies in the Middle East that emerged, right, and became independent states like Syria, like Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, and Israel itself, right? They were created by secular movements. Arab nationalism is very highly secular movement, right? The Zionist movement itself is very secular movement, right? Ben-Gurion was very dismissive to religion, right? And when he arrived in Palestine in 1906, he even refused to visit Jerusalem. It took him around 4 to 5 months to visit Jerusalem, right? So this movement was very secular, but what was for them very religious, very sacred, was the sovereignty of the state. Sovereignty that gives you freedom to create, to make the social order itself, to make laws, to envision the creation of a society and a new man or a new citizen, right, who believes in the same way that the Zionist movement believes. And this is the logic of the Zionist movement, to create the new Zionist man who is different than the Jew, the diaspora, who is weak and coward and who couldn't defend himself. Whereas the Zionist man, he is assertive, he can defend himself, right? So this idea of sovereignty became the new theology, the very sacred to, like in Syria, right? Like in Egypt, the same way, right? And in that sovereignty, Palestinians suffered the most because they are not the sovereign anymore, right? They used to own lands. Now to own land means you have sovereignty, which means gives you not only power, but it's for many Palestinians, it's the main source of pride. If you don't have land, you don't have almost dignity, right? So once they were, dispossessed from their lands, and as the state start to confiscate most of the lands, right, they were, left with almost nothing, right? So this is like the process that created a sort of a sense of alienation or a sense of estrangement for Palestinian citizens inside Israel.
So the issue of the secularity is something that the kind of post-colonial, post-imperial secularity that builds the nation states and the concepts of sovereignty, even though we know that sovereignty was very, very uneven and very unstable.
And that secularity also wasn't never 100%.
So the thing is, even when we talk about the secularity, it is a type of theology. It does have its own rituals and practices, and we all know that the secularity is also religious in its own way. I think that understanding the relationship between Palestinian citizens of Israel and the state is also through this kind of shift of the state from the secular image of itself to the more religious, the state as a religious embodiment or culmination of destiny in many ways. And so I think that it's true that from the very outset, the whole idea of the military government was to prevent return of refugees after 1948, was to prevent movement, was to prevent development. But over time, Palestinian citizens of Israel become an asset. And that asset is that they are the living proof of the liberal order. So, and the living proof that Zionist order can be also a liberal order. But then when the religious vision of the state takes over, they're no longer as important as that living proof. And and I think we are at this moment where
do you place that?
So
moment?
I think that
is it with the establishment of this current government or before?
I think this current government is the culmination of that moment, right? Because we have a government that declares for the first time in Israel's history, this is the government of the Jewish people, and the state is of the Jewish people, and this is what the point of the state, period. And it's basically kind of taking the nation state law and putting it into action in its coalition agreements. And so it's a culmination of the process that brought the nation state law, that brought the counterterrorism law that is also stripping Palestinians of citizenship in various ways. But what you have is this new order that says we no longer need the Palestinian citizens of Israel to be our guarantee, our living proof of the liberal order, because we are not interested in that liberal order.
Or the flip side of it, no, is really that the Palestinian citizens of Israel are being co-opted or perhaps joined in by liberal forces in Israel they understand them as an asset in the fight against Jewish supremacy and extremism. And I think perhaps the previous government, in which for the first time in Israel's history, an Arab party was part of the ruling coalition. And I mean, in a way, it contradicts what you said, Ahmed, about the last 5 years or so being the worst period in the history of the Palestinian citizens of Israel since the military administration. And at the same time, it fits very neatly into what Yael is just saying about how, the forces are now much clearly divided between the progressive ones and the reactionary ones. And, in order to be the living proof of the liberal order of Israel, the liberal camp in Israel needs the Arab citizens more than ever.
But one important caveat here is that the party that was in the government, that was in the coalition, was a party that shied away from defining itself as a party of Palestinian citizens of Israel. And so you also have this internal rift between those that are defining themselves as Arab Israelis and those that are defining themselves as Palestinian citizens of Israel.
Is that a new distinction between these two groups that Yael was just referring to?
Palestinian citizens of Israel?
And Arab Israelis, the way these two parts of the community see themselves.
Well, look, let me give you one example. It's I try to be a good citizen in Israel. I was born and raised in a small village next to Nazareth. I followed what the state wanted me to be. So I called myself Arab citizen of Israel, not Palestinian citizen, right? I never wanted to be a Palestinian citizen. I never, right? All my life I wanted to be, like the rest, like the rest of the people, try to assimilate as I could. But I was, all the time pushed out, and I embraced my Palestinian hood, if you will, right? Just because I was, pushed out. And small examples. You go to the airport. One time I flew from Austin, Texas, to Frankfurt, and from Frankfurt to Tel Aviv. So I never wanted to be a Palestinian, as I said. I always wanted to be a good citizen, Arab citizen of Israel. But since I was always, being, feeling discriminated against and being harassed in small ways, right? I embraced my Palestinian identity, and also with the new generation, Gen Z, right? It's not acceptable anymore to say that you are Arab citizen of Israel. You have to be a Palestinian citizen of Israel. Right?
So is this distinction generational? I mean, would you say that the older generation votes for the party that was a member of the ruling coalition, and the younger ones are perhaps more contrarian to this political system?
It's not only generational, it's also, by eras. In the 1960s, the first Arab to write a book about the history of Palestinian citizens of Israel, Jarius, he actually entitled his book Arab Citizens of Israel, rather than Palestinian citizens of Israel. Right? Today, a book like that would not have any chance to be sold. Right? If you publish a book with this title, you will be instantly being seen as co-opted Arab or institutionalized Arab, or right? It's not anymore accepted.
Or just a good Arab, yeah.
Right? Or a good Arab. That's right.
I think that one of the interesting things that is happening now is having this question of the unity between fronts. So this thing that happened in 2021 was a very worrying sign for many in the Israeli security establishment and the political establishment, where Palestinian citizens of Israel were identifying with what was happening in Jerusalem, what was happening in Gaza, and you had Shomer Chomot.
You mean the sectarian violence within Israel?
Within Israel, and this was, I think, a real cataclysmic change that we kind of gloss over.
But at the same time, and I'm sorry to push back here, 2 months later, the Bennett coalition was formed with the United Arab Party in it. It's always two forces pushing in opposite directions.
You have the forces that are pushing to and fro, but I think, and this is the point that I want to make, I think that as in this very dark and terrible moment, as people want to push forward and imagine a possibility for democracy, but also a possibility for political solution, one of the most important elements is the role that Palestinian citizens of Israel play in this history. And instead of marginalizing this very prominent group that speaks not only the two languages, but speaks also two political languages, the language of the Israeli state and the language of the Israeli and the Jewish Israeli public, and the language of the Palestinian state to be. And so you have this very important population that in a way has its own path and its own solution to provide for both the questions, the internal question of democracy and the larger question of political solution.
Ahmad, how do you think the 7th of October will, or perhaps has already, changed things in a substantial way?
Well, it's brought to attention the irony in Israel, in which Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel were integrated more than any time before. You go to universities, you feel and you see many Palestinian students. You go to hospitals. You go in any public space in major Israeli cities.
You know
right?
what strikes me the most? I actually have to give my own impression as just a normal citizen. When I see veiled women bus drivers in Tel Aviv, that's really,
wow.
I mean, I'm saying to myself,
Right.
it's the days of the Messiah. Of course, I'm thinking about it more critically and thinking, okay, maybe not so. But this is something that I don't think you would have ever imagined even 5 or 6 or 7 years ago.
That's right. This is the irony that I'm talking about. When you see more Palestinian citizens in the public space, in the public squares in Israel, right? In all Israeli institutions. At the same time, you see that deepening feeling of alienation and estrangement, which is this is irony that we have to somehow to explain.
Dr. Ahmad Agbaria, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.